Welcome to the Table Podcast, where we discuss issues of God and culture, brought to you by Dallas Theological Seminary.
Welcome to the Table, where we discuss issues of God and culture. I'm Daryl Bach, Executive Director for Cultural Engagement at the Hendricks Center at Dallas Theological Seminary. And our topic today is young women in ministry. And I have three ladies. They're three of my favorite ladies here on campus. I work with two of them, and the third one is my daughter. So it's a combination of the women I spend more time with than my wife. But they're all three engaged in ministry and different ministries. So there's Elisa Laird here on the far end, and she is my daughter. So if she slips and calls me Dad, it's okay. And then Heather Zimmerman, who works at the Hendricks Center with me, and Kimberly Cook. I always call her Kim. So Kimberly Cook, who also works at the Hendricks Center. And all of them have a seminary background and ministry background. And the way this works is that Elisa is married, but her husband does not work with her husband in ministry. Heather is single, and Kim is married and works with her husband in ministry. So that's the way we've broken this down. So I'm going to let each of you talk about the ministries that you're engaged in, and we'll go from my right to my left. So Kim, you get to start.
Okay. I am largely engaged in singles ministry with my husband at the church, and we do my main responsibilities with him are discipleship of the leadership team, and working with especially the women there, because he is a man, and working with single women is kind of difficult for him. So I'm a good buffer. Okay. And so we work discipleship, and then we also do. We've started writing Bible studies together for both the men and the women's Bible studies, and then I also co-teach with him both on Sunday mornings and also at specialty events. We have a thing called Doctrine and Dessert, where he and I sit and we walk through doctrine, just random doctrines with our singles. And so I'm with him kind of all along the way, and my seminary background allows me to kind of hold my own ground, as well as
because you majored in systematic theology, right? So you and John Calvin are just like this.
BFFs.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. All right, Heather?
Yeah, so I've been involved in various things, and I'm kind of at a transition point right now. But my main ministry experience was working for 4 years with a short-term missions organization that facilitates mission trips for youth groups. And so I was in a leadership position overseeing the staff teams who ran the mission sites. And now I'm transitioning into theological education. And this summer I'm traveling to Ethiopia to teach at a Bible college there.
And you've done some social work as well, basically, right? Is that
yeah. Fair? Yeah. So the organization that does the short-term mission trips does a lot of community development and poverty alleviation. So that's probably my biggest experience, but I'm hoping to go into theological education.
Okay. And Elisa?
I'm at Bent Tree Bible Fellowship. I'm the early childhood programming director, and so my basic responsibility is crafting our worship times for our kids. I recently transitioned from doing both elementary and early childhood to just now early childhood. My primary experience ministry-wise has been at churches, so and in kids ministry, and so that's basically what I do.
Okay, let's talk about how you came to end up in ministry. How did this happen? I think we'll just do the same sequence. Okay.
I always knew I wanted to be in ministry, and so I started when I was 16. I worked at a camp, and I worked at that camp for 6 more summers all through college, and I knew that I wanted to be in full-time ministry. That's what brought me to seminary. And I ended up getting married, which I never would have seen coming. And so I'm in a different sort of ministry and a role than I would have ever thought. I would have thought I would have been a little bit more in an active role in a church or in a seminary or college or something. But at this point, I landed in more of a family type ministry.
Okay. All right. And Heather?
Yeah, I don't know if you knew this or not, but I've actually wanted to be a missionary ever since I was 7. Like,
Oh.
I would pretend my Barbies were missionaries and pretend like small.
I don't think I've ever heard Barbies played with that way, but that's a new one.
Yeah, or we'd pretend when our parents had small groups that they were the communists and we were like trying to smuggle Bibles past them and stuff. So, yeah, so that was kind of my childhood.
Bible smuggling Barbies. I don't
Yes.
think I've ever quite heard of that ministry before.
This is a whole new
Yeah.
YouTube channel.
I know. I was gonna say, young women in ministry. This
yeah,
is what you get.
never know. Exactly right. Okay.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so then I went to Moody to go into missions and was considering Bible translation, but realized I'm not a linguist. And so, long story short, God brought me here.
Okay. Very good.
Well, mine's a little different. I was pretty much sure I was not going to end up in ministry.
Yeah, thanks to your dad, right?
Yeah, everything I saw. I did not at all want to be in ministry. I wanted to go into journalism. And so I looking back now, I say this is me being Jonah and kind of fleeing. So I went into publishing. I was in publishing, completely happy, and then had my first child. And the publishing world isn't exactly conducive to raising a family. I had authors calling me at all nights, wanting to go through pages and stuff, and 10 p.m., that's just not okay. And a position came open at our church in Illinois for the office manager. And I was like, oh, it's 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I can get the work done. It's not really ministry because I'm just like a secretary in the office. That's how they get you. And I volunteered for kids ministry. So I figured, hey, if I get all my work done, then I can do my volunteer stuff while I'm at work. And it works out really well. And lo and behold, I've now been in ministry, I calculated up 9 years. It's the longest I've been in any one area of work. When we moved here to Dallas, I switched over to kids ministry, which is what I'd been volunteering in, and I can't see myself doing anything else.
Okay, so you've kind of fell into it, huh?
Yeah, I totally fell into it. But it's what I was created. It's the way I'm wired. And I think that's what God was like patiently bringing me to.
Now, you said you were having to negotiate this space. The interesting remark is that journalism, or at least editing, is not particularly conducive to family life. You sometimes hear that about ministry. So I'd like to compare those two a little bit.
Well, and that's true. I mean, I would say that's probably my constant struggle, is that balance between family life and ministry life and what I feel called to do. It's cool because now that my boys are 8 and 10, they're older, and so we're able to bring them in more into what we do. So one of the things that we do, we have a local outreach that we do every Martin Luther King Day with the local elementary school, where we host a one-day kind of camp, so that way parents who don't have the opportunity for childcare can have their kids taken care of. And our kids volunteer and buddy with them. And so normally I work that, but my boys got to do that with me. And so it's really been kind of cool passing on that legacy and looking for opportunities to where our whole family can participate. Even though I'm on staff, they can participate in ministry alongside us. So there's a little bit more of a balance. Bent Tree is also really, really flexible in a lot of ways. And so there aren't very many situations where I feel like I have to choose between my family or my work or my ministry, so to speak.
Now, there was a time when Ray, your husband, was ministering at Bent Tree alongside you in a different role, but there, and that is no longer the case. What difference has that made for ministry, or has it impacted it at all?
It's actually made it a little easier. I mean, what my husband does, he's a video engineer, and so he travels. And so when he's gone, it's kind of like it was before, where you're kind of single parenting and you're having to balance things. But when he was there, we both had demands, and so we would both, and we worked for different areas. I worked in kids, and he was with worship and arts. And so the time frame for when your big events are is the same, but the requirements are different. And so we would take turns. There was a lot of, okay, we're getting to the church at 6:30. You take the kids from here to there. I'll pick them up here. I'll check them in. Here are the tags. You pick them up. And it was a lot of that. And now it's more of like when he's home, he just is like, okay, I'll get the kids. I handle all that. Hey, you need to work late? No problem. I'll handle homework. there's a little bit more of a give and take and a little bit more freedom.
So there are different, we're probing here different dynamics of what goes on with women's ministry, kind of depending on where you are in your stage in life. So you've got to balance family. Heather, you've got another issue to deal with, and since we're kind of in this category, and that is, as a single woman ministering in a context, have you found that challenging at all in any way, or just plunge ahead?
Well, both. I plunged through the challenges. Yeah, I think, and I mean, Kim's been there too before. Well, all of you been, because we're married forever. But yeah, part of it's just the financial burden of like, well, a friend of mine was joking the other night that like us outside of seminary, we have to go to bed early and get up early. And like, hey, I have to bring home my own bacon and cook it too and do my homework. And so there's the financial burden of that. And then, I mean, it's nice because there is more free time in that I don't have to balance the juggles of family life. But then I don't really know how to describe the other sides. There's the matchmaking, which I'm fine if God does the matchmaking. And I guess some of the expectations, I think some of us single women, and maybe women in general, can sometimes be seen as like a threat if we're not married, that we're like a potential like temptation or something, which we're just there to do our job and do ministry.
Yeah, we can actually, we did a previous podcast with Sue Edwards in which we talked about how women are viewed in ministry, and how that actually is one of the challenges is that women can be set apart and treated very differently because they're women, but not because of anything that they've done personally. And so that's an odd spot to be in some ways. Kim, now you've got another adjustment coming. You're facing getting ready to have your first child, and we've had to negotiate
As a center.
As a center, your role in ministry while trying to help you move into the adjustment of preparing to have a child, etc. How have you found that experience so far?
Stressful and super just an open-ended question, at this point. And I don't know who I am as a mother. I don't know who I am as a mother working. I don't know any of those kinds of things. And so just trying to, just be patient and see and have open hands. And I would love to continue to work. And I feel like our work here is ministry. And so I would love to continue to be in the ministry even here. But I don't know. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah, and of course we've had to negotiate giving you the space of being a mother and being pregnant and everything that comes with that. And so we talk about that. And this is actually part of the reason why I wanted to do the podcast, is because we've got really 3 different situations, but any ministry has to cope with the variety of challenges that come from ministry in these kinds of circumstances. And so we've had discussions about kind of what's ahead, and then dealing with really the realities of being pregnant in some ways.
Well, it's a very young women in ministry issue.
Yes.
Like whether you're in academia, because it came up in discussions that I had with some professors on PhD, and then it also has come up here and in ministry. It's just a very unique time in life, and obviously it's only possible for one gender, and so it's just a very unique area where
and everyone has to navigate, and then just to be honest, and again with some disclosure, your early pregnancy has been challenging health-wise, and so there's that adjustment that you have to go through as well. Some people sail through that, and other people, it's hard. And so there's been that aspect of things, and so it requires people who are managing people in ministry, young women in ministry who find themselves in this situation, to be open and flexible in order to deal with what it is that they're facing. Hopefully we haven't treated you poorly.
No, you haven't. And actually, I want to say, I think that is such a huge thing. And I've heard, I've read 1,000 things, I feel like, at this point on this whole area. But I feel like I heard somewhere that if it's kind of been shown that if an organization or a boss is committed to the female worker who is pregnant and, and flexible and tries to work with her, she will be loyal to them forever, because it's just such an interesting time.
Nice.
And I can really identify with that, it's like, I do feel like DTS has been flexible with me and willing to work and kind of saying, okay, well, we'll just see what happens and we'll figure this out. And I think that's such an important thing, because you don't want to close off women our age from ministry, even though it has to take on a little bit of a different tone.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
and I mean, I don't know. So I was pregnant with my first in the secular world, and then I was pregnant with my second when I was on staff at that church in Illinois. And while both, like, as far as the health aspect goes, both were extremely flexible, but I found that the church was actually way more accommodating than my publishing house, and that was one of the things that actually made it hard when we moved down here. Was, well, geez, these people have been with me, and my second pregnancy started out a little rough. Like, we thought we were actually gonna lose the baby, and I remember having to call my boss in and tell them, hey, I need to go home. I have to be on bed rest. And they prayed over me and they said, you take however much time you need, we'll figure this out. No questions asked. I mean, they checked in on me, but it wasn't because they were passive aggressive and like, hey, come back.
It was pressure.
Yeah, no, not at all. And then when it came time, we sat down and I'm like, okay, I've got 2. I can't afford 2 in full-time childcare. Would you consider job sharing this office manager? And he was like a little nervous about that. He's like, and we found somebody, and he's like, I never thought this would work, but this was awesome. And so they were willing to try something. And so even as somebody, for lack of a better term, is, on the lower level of skill-wise as an office manager, which does require a lot of skill, but just, it's not like a pastoral or a staff position, to be willing and to be flexible to accommodate those kinds of family desires and financial considerations was huge for me.
Well, and it allows you to keep your talent, and you have continued and even taken on greater responsibilities as you were able, and they didn't lose you in the midst of that because they were flexible.
Yeah, and I think too, when you're young, and you're still figuring out who you are, like you said, as a mom, as a ministry worker, as far as your calling goes, to have that kind of flexibility and that relational collateral really helps you continue to have open doors to where you can continue to grow on that path. Whereas I don't know necessarily if that door had shut, what that would have done to me in terms of ministry and whether or not I would have felt free to continue, if that makes sense.
So that's interesting. That means that not only is there loyalty to the employer, but there may well be an impact on how you view ministry long term in terms of how you're treated in this kind of a situation. It's pretty important. Let's go through, and the rest of what we're going to do is probably going to park here in some ways. Let's go through some of the challenges of ministry in being female, and I kind of want to segment this in that the first conversation I want to have is, all right, we're at a very conservative seminary. You're in some context of ministry where the issue of women in ministry is not controversial at all in terms of what they do or whatever, and so it's theoretically it's supposed to be a little more straightforward run. But in this context, where you're in a theologically conservative environment where some have questions about the role of women in certain kinds of ministry. How did you find, first of all, are you finding your seminary experience? How have you been treated by people other than your husband and your boss in ministry, and what has that meant, and what advice would you give to a young woman who's thinking about coming into ministry and going to seminary about what she might have to be prepared to face?
Is that me?
Yeah, okay. You're getting to lead off a lot.
Great. I had a fantastic seminary experience. I really didn't encounter much friction as far as me being a female. There were, I did the THM here, so I was in a lot of the classes where I was the only woman in the room, and for the most part, I felt welcome. Sometimes I kind of felt like their mascot a little bit. Like they would cheer for me when I got something right in Greek or something.
Because a girl could never do that.
But it was never, in a harmful way. I think they were really excited that there was a woman in there, and they were cheering me on in a very helpful way as brothers in the Lord. The only people I think I ever had run-ins with were students more than faculty members or administration or anything. And those students, they're working through things too, and they're figuring out what they think, and they're encountering new things. And for the most part, even the male students that I ran into that had some questionable statements, I even had them come back and apologize later on, several years later, and say, I've learned things since then, and I really, it stood out to me, and I apologize for that. So I had a great experience, and I would just encourage any woman who is considering it to come in and not really have defenses up. I think that's maybe one thing that I just didn't have. I didn't carry myself as a woman in seminary. I just carried myself as a seminary student. And I think that made a big difference, at least in my interactions.
Heather?
Yeah, mine was different. There's kind of like part one and part two. So part one was really challenging, and there's also the geographical dynamic here. So I was from a part of the country where women are in very high levels of leadership and education and everything. And so coming down here was really, I hate telling people this, but honestly, I didn't realize I was a woman until I came here. Not that I didn't know my gender, but I never felt so defined by it. And there were a lot of challenges my first half. And there was a situation where I was denied a ministry experience during my time here because of being a young single woman. And so, which that person I worked it out now, we're on great terms. But that was really hard. And I left that season really bitter. But then part two has been wonderful. And I served on the academic affairs committee here, got to see the men who are really leading this seminary and hear their hearts. And it was incredible. And then even just now my preaching class, I'm the only woman in it. But the men are amazing, and we just have a great camaraderie. And so, and a few negative situations with students. One guy, when he asked what my emphasis was, and I told him I want to go into homiletics, but that's not really the best path for me, so I'm going into New Testament. And he's like, have you considered celibacy a possibility? And so thinking no guy would want to do that. But aside from that, it's really been good overall.
I almost turned this into a sports metaphor, the first half and the second half. And the first half was kind of interesting, and the second half was better. But I want to probe some of the things that you ran into in the first half. Can you share some of the, no names please, but some of the experiences that you had that signaled or created awkwardness in being a woman in ministry?
Yeah, and I will say my first half was better than some other women's first half because I went to Bible college before coming here.
So you were inoculated.
Well, both inoculated, although that also had two parts as well.
Yeah.
And so similar style. But I had 3 years of Greek coming in. So a lot of the comments my girlfriends were getting from guys about this being a man's program and just having lower expectations of them intellectually. I didn't have that as much, even though some of them were smarter than me because I had already taken 3 years of Greek. And so that helped my background. But I think...
So you could out-parse the guys if they gave you a hard time. Is that what you're telling us?
Maybe. Yeah. And so I think part of it and I just, this from my personality, I don't like being boxed in. And that so often when men and sometimes women think about women in ministry, there's certain categories that are okay for a woman to do. And I'm not talking about the broader biblical standards of men and women. I'm just talking about like cultural stereotypes. And that women who aren't passionate about Pinterest and putting on women's ministry events that are like that, which are wonderful and they're needed. But women who have passions for homiletics, for preaching, for teaching, for leadership, often those are seen as threatening, even though we're not trying to take over the church, not trying to be a senior pastor, and trying to find a place for me. And so sometimes men not understanding that and feeling threatened by that, or just not treating us as academic equals.
Okay, so that's kind of the overview. Are there any particular incidents that you remember that are kind of typical or that you're aware of that other students have had as they've gone through that kind of indicate things just to be aware of and then think about how you negotiate your way through that kind of space?
I think one thing, this is kind of general again, but it comes from specific incidences, is that myself and some friends have felt that people treat those of us who are single women going into ministry who do desire to get married, that ministry is just a way of our passing time until we get married, and then we'll fit into this nice little box as a pastor's wife or whatever that is. And so realizing, no, I genuinely want to do ministry, whether or not God provides that man, and I want to continue doing it. Obviously, different seasons of life, things will change, whether you get pregnant or move or whatever. But seeing that I am a valid contribution to ministry, not just passing time.
Okay, that makes sense, and I think that is actually a very important common problem that does come up in relationship to women being involved in ministry. Lisa, what has your seminary experience been like? Has it been that hard? You're in a slightly different situation in that you have been in ministry the entire time you've been here as a student, so you're more a commuter student than really being a part of the community here. So that makes it a little bit different. But still, have you run into anything as you've done your work?
Yeah. So a lot of my struggle is really, really deeply personal. And so sometimes when I've been in class, I understand exactly what you're saying about, there's this box and there's this expectation, and I've never fit into the box. I've always been different, which is fine. Sometimes it's fine for me. Sometimes it's not. And depending on my mood, it'll determine whether or not how I feel about that. So that's been a lot of what I feel like this season and just this journey has been. In that I think one of the reasons why I wasn't interested in pursuing ministry earlier on was because I felt like there was this box, and I looked at the box and I'm like, well, there's no way I'm ever going to fit into that box. I don't operate the way a lot of women operate. I don't look the way a lot of women look. I don't process things the way a lot of women process. So clearly that's just not going to work for me, and I need to find a different avenue. And then as I stepped into, obviously, kids ministry, which is traditionally completely okay for women to be in, but I've always gone about it a little bit differently, it was okay. And then making the decision to come into seminary, I figured, well, I'm going to do online classes, and I'll take a class here or there, and I'll be able just to kind of scooch in under the radar, and it'll be fine. And I took a class, and we were doing group projects, and I was the only woman in this group, and we were talking about gender differences. And so that was kind of interesting. And a lot of the conversation, it was great conversation. The guys were amazing in terms of just us navigating it, but it did bring up some stuff. And I remember coming home, because because I'm not on campus a lot, and so I don't know a lot of people, it's not necessarily the group environment's not necessarily a safe place to process that stuff. So I'd come home and I'd be talking to my husband about all this personal stuff that it brought up, in the sense of, I want to be obedient to my calling. I want to follow where God is leading me. And on the one hand, I don't want to just push on ahead because I feel like I am female and I can do anything and everything that a guy can do, because that's not necessarily what God's calling me to. But I also don't want to be disobedient in the sense of saying, well, traditionally that's a guy's role, so I shouldn't even consider that. That's off the table. But for me, there's always been this just emotional process of working through what that is, and wanting to, like I said, be obedient not only to my logical thought process, but also to Scripture. And so sometimes it means turning to a female mentor or other mentors too, and unpacking what that looks like. And sometimes it means doing a little bit more research and getting into the Word, and really just kind of at each step saying, okay, God, this is the direction I feel like you're leading me in. Help me to be obedient with that, whatever that looks like. Not because I have an axe to grind or have an agenda, but because this is truly what you're calling me to. And so I'm a people pleaser, even though I like to say I'm risky, I'm not. And so there are times when I think I tend to step back because I'm like, oh, well, that's going to kind of ruffle some feathers, or that's going to lead to more interesting conversations that I'm not sure I'm prepared for emotionally. And so it's easier just to stay safe in my little world and be okay. And so that's kind of what this whole process has led for me. I don't know that it's necessarily been some big like aha moment as terms of like the freedom that we as women have. It's been a much more personal journey for me. I came here completely content to stay in kids ministry and not necessarily do anything unconventional, even though I can be unconventional. And I don't know that that's where I'm always going to end up now. And so I think as you look out into that unknown, that's where I think seminary has been really, really helpful, actually. It's been a safe place to process that and to challenge those things. Even in those challenging conversations and discussions with maybe guys who don't necessarily understand what all's going on in our heads as we're navigating this stuff, it's been really helpful to me. I think the biggest thing I would say that makes it hard, just from whether it's either seminary or in a ministry perspective, is this, when people are sitting there looking at you saying, hey, you're a woman, this is not open to you, and you feel called to it and you feel equipped and you feel created to do something, it becomes extremely personal. And at least for me, it's hard for me to separate the two at times. And it becomes hard in those conflicted moments to communicate that clearly, to where it's like, hey, you may think this is a doctrinal statement or a philosophical debate, but for me, what you're saying is the way God wired you and the way God equipped you is not okay for you to actually act on it.
In the church,
in the church at least.
You can do whatever you want.
You can do
in the real
whatever you
world.
want outside.
Okay, you can run for president.
But at least in that sense. And so I don't know that guys necessarily understand the emotional, the identity issues that get brought up in that. I know guys have identity issues too, but I feel like, especially with stuff like our calling, especially if we're called to leadership or we're called to teaching or we're called to certain things that maybe aren't, like I said, standard for women, it's a lot more complex, and you have to really create a safe space in order to be able to dive into that. And a lot of times the conversation starts at such a level that you don't necessarily feel like you have the safe space to really get into it, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Can I add to that? Sorry, real quick.
Sure.
I've had times, kind of like you're saying, and it's hard where you're wrestling, where you genuinely want to do what God wants and you're not looking to disregard Scripture. But then, like you said, God's wired you and equipped you. And I've sat in a church before, a large church, and it hit me that in May, I will have higher education than everyone in the church except for the senior pastor. And I'm not looking to overthrow the senior pastor, but I'm like, is there a place in this church for me? Like, is there a place for me to be used, not even paid position, but to be used in my giftings? And so wrestling with that type of thing too.
Yeah, I think that's a real serious tension, and it's and everybody has to negotiate it, because the space that you're talking about is not something you end up creating for yourself. It's something that the church has to give you in order for it to work. And so it can be a real serious challenge for everybody involved, particularly in communities where there may not be agreement on what it is that a woman can or can't do. Then it becomes even trickier, because then no matter what you do, someone else in the community is responding to what's going on, and that makes it tough. Elise, I want to stay with one more question before I throw a general one out to everyone. That'll probably be the last thing we have time for. And that is, you said you wrestled with moving into ministry at all, that was a hard move, and God kind of slowly drew you in. What was it that initially made you hesitant? Was it this wrestling with the idea of I'm a woman, thinking about my role in the church, and I know that at least in some traditions that, and the ones that I'm attached to, women aren't free to do everything. So was that part of it, or was there more to it than that?
There's probably multiple layers to it. I probably should preface this with saying, I've never had any issue, at least at Bentry, in terms of having freedom to operate in my giftedness. They're extremely accommodating as far as that goes. But as far as my background goes, I went, there was this period when I was a teenager, and I was always drawn to the Bible, and I was always drawn to figuring out how to teach it. And I didn't quite know what to do with it because, you know this, but we went to a church that was extremely conservative growing up. I mean, you guys tell stories about, I remember this, but I don't know that I knew it at the time, where mom was the first one to pray out loud because women weren't allowed to pray publicly. So even though you grow up in that environment and you don't necessarily realize what that means, but you get the sense that there's certain things that you're just not supposed to do. And like I said, I've always felt a little bit like a fish out of water in a lot of ways. I'm always very self-conscious, even though I think, to project that I'm extremely confident about who I am. I am also, like I said, a people pleaser, and I'm aware that not everybody can handle me at my level. My husband will be the first to tell you that, but that's one of the reasons why he loves me.
Yeah. We pass that on to Ray.
Yes, it's the gift that keeps on
That's
giving.
Right, exactly.
So like I said, this is a deeply, deeply personal decision for me. And so it would be, that love for Scripture, that whether or not I had permission to operate in those giftings, whether or not I felt, I remember, and I may remember wrongly, as a young girl having a lot of conversations about men and women and what was okay and what wasn't okay, and probably in my teenage hormonal craziness, felt like there were going to be areas where it just wasn't going to work. And I wasn't ever going to fit into that. And so why bother trying? Why bother trying to be something I'm not when that's never going to happen and I'm going to be unhappy? But what I don't think I realized was that in completely shutting that down, I also didn't ever suspect that God might have bigger plans and that there might be a place for somebody as unique and quirky as I am in ministry to serve women, to serve men, to serve their children and their families. And to be completely shut off by that was also not okay.
Yeah, I think that's an important observation that what I find people have is they have expectations about what a woman can and can't do, and their expectations are actually pretty narrow.
Correct. There's this defined little box that you have to fit in. We're not all Beth Moores. We're not all, we're not all, all these different women that you see teaching. And there's nothing wrong with them. They have completely amazing ministries, and they've changed ministry in so many ways. And I know guys feel the pressure to be like, Andy Stanley or, insert Mark Batterson, insert people here. But I don't know if it's, at least for me, I feel like when you walk into a room, there's an expectation already on you. This fall, for the first time, I taught women. I've never done that. I could have told you before I got asked I would never do that. I'm completely fine with teaching kids. They love me and I love them, and you can't really ever, you might get a little, sassiness back and forth, but you can give it back. And that was really hard for me. It was really hard because, one, it was something I didn't want to enter into because it opened up a bunch of junk that I was just completely content to just let stay in my closet. And it was a lot of stuff that had to do with stuff that I felt from when I was a teenager of, you're going to walk into this room and you don't fit that mold. And what do you have to say to these women? Because they're going to look at you and they're going to see you as, well, I can't relate to her. And it was a completely different situation. In fact, it was really amazing. And it opened my eyes to the fact that maybe, my box was too small. And that I'm not necessarily giving our body enough credit for the fact that they are willing to listen to many different types of voices. And maybe that's part of what's been a shift in culture. I don't know if that would have flown, 10, 20 years ago, but at least now, I think part of it is the challenge to challenge our young women to step out in faith and encourage and to be willing to put themselves out there and take those risks.
Well, that makes for an interesting transition. Kim, you sound like you're resonating with what it is.
Well, I was just going to say, I've found particularly since graduating, it seems like the Lord kind of keeps opening up some teaching doors and some opportunities that I, strangely enough, really don't want to do. I've never really wanted to teach all that much. I love academics. I love being in buried away in the library researching. That's what I've always wanted to do. Maybe teaching in a classroom. But as far as, getting up and teaching or even preaching, that kind of
or doing
thing,
podcasts.
That's not really what I had in mind for myself. And not really what's in my comfort zone. But it just seems like the Lord keeps opening those doors. And I've found that at least my training gets me the credibility I need. It has nothing to do with my gender. My training puts me in front and they'll listen, and then from there, you kind of have to earn it a little bit. And I don't know that I do. We'll see, but long term. But I don't know. At least that's what I've found is that because DTS has invested in me and I've invested in that, people honor that.
Heather, how do you don't strike me as the shy type. So.
It's funny because I get stereotyped by my appearance because I'm petite. You can't tell as much. I'm blonde, but I relate with you with I play fantasy football and I'm still working on you to play it and surf and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm starting to find kind of I feel like a lot of the focus has been more on the negative, but I've found a lot of positive experiences. Like my pastor here in Dallas meets with DTS students, even anyone going to ministry on a weekly basis just to talk about the stuff we don't talk about in seminary. And I remember the first time I came, I was the only girl, and they were just talking about pastors' concerns, and I'm like, this is cool, but I don't really plan on being a senior pastor. And he, that day I got home, there was an email waiting for me saying, hey, we need you here. We'd love to have you here. And so it's been surprising how God has used men in very positive ways to invest in me, to believe in me. My preaching professor at Moody took me aside, really coached me through it. And so I've also had some really positive experiences when people actually take the time, like you said, to invest. And then their investment gives me credibility as well.
So you've got to be able to, and several of you have been saying this, that you've got to be able to trust the church to help you see the space that's possible. As we started off on this direction, the point I was trying to make is that sometimes we do build our boxes so narrowly. There's next to nothing that a woman can do. Well, in fact, there's tons that a woman can do in the church and should be doing, is gifted to do, and should be encouraged to do, et cetera. And so being able to make that point is actually part of the reason why we're doing the podcast, is to say to churches, think through the rich well of resources that you have available in your communities when you give women permission to function in relationship to their giftedness, and you work that through biblically. The possibilities are actually quite open, and there's lots of potential to go in lots of directions with it.
Can I say something to that real quick? And I think, especially for men in leadership, at least in my experience, the encouragement of it has been huge for me. I'm shy, but it seems like I'm shy, but you're a little bit unsure of whether you want to be in that space or whether you can be, or, I never really cared. I was like, well, I'm just going to do it because this is what I'm going to do. But it seems like in all of our cases, it's taken several male leadership voices saying, you should do this, you should do this, here's the opportunity, get up there, that kind of thing. So I do think that is an important element. It's not just, okay, well, you go do whatever you're going to do. Like, it's investing in them and making them do stuff that might be outside of their comfort zone.
There's an encouragement
huge.
involved here that I think is extremely important and is something that helps the church to grow and to see how to function as a body and to take advantage of the gifts that are available and to do so in ways that are honoring. The time's flown. Let me ask you all one quick question. This has got to be crisp. It's got to really be short. What's the one thing you would say to churches about being a young woman in ministry that you would hope they would get?
You're going to start with me, aren't you?
No.
Actually, I'll take this one.
Okay.
I would say create a mentorship or leadership pathway and be specific and intentional with it. We've actually started something like this at Bent Tree, and it's been really cool to watch, whether it's women mentoring women or men mentoring women. I think that is really, really intentional. I think there's a great window of time to where you can, there's value in speaking truth over young women and saying, hey, I see this in you and I see this in you now. Because it's a time of life where there are a lot of other things competing for that, and you don't always necessarily see truth in that.
Okay, well, we are out of time. I would love to hear what the other responses would be, but I think creating that space is important. That's why we've done the podcast, to make people alert, to encourage them, and to have ministries think about what the possibilities are with young women, because the possibilities literally are endless. We thank you for being with us today on The Table, and we look forward to having you back with us again soon.
Thanks for listening to The Table Podcast. For more podcasts like this one, visit dts.edu/The Table. Dallas Theological Seminary. Teach truth, love well.